Hey guys, welcome back. Robocraft Early Access coverage. This is episode 13. I'm Enigmius, and today, talking about modifying and adding to an Armor Core vehicle. Now, it's just convenient that the edits put us in this position after the last video. Last video, we started building the vehicle. We took it for a spin in the test map, and it did not too bad. The practice map, not perfect, but a good start. Some things that I wanted to change was adding a fourth gun. I had originally planned for 4 guns on the vehicle, but I wasn't sure exactly where I wanted to put the fourth one. After seeing how this vehicle performs, just peeking its head over ridges, I decided that we definitely wanted to get that fourth gun in line with the other 3 that are already on the vehicle, because I'd also thought of maybe having a back section of the vehicle with the fourth gun attached there, and realized if we're peeking over the ridge like that, the fourth gun is just going to be firing off into the air every time, and it's very frustrating with a railgun vehicle to waste shots for any reason. I also noticed in the practice tour that the vehicle doesn't turn very well when it's moving forward. It kind of is very sluggish. Moving backwards and trying to turn, it performs very, very well. I'll be keeping that in mind as part of the strategy and controlling the vehicle in matches. But realistically speaking, I would prefer that it turns better while moving forward as well, and I thought in order to accomplish that, maybe moving the front legs forward would be a good idea. So moving the second and third guns forward, both to make room for the fourth gun and also to allow a little bit of extra room to move the legs forward 1 block, meant a little bit of reconstructing. And this is, I think, one of those things when people are looking at Triforcing and even the Armor Core method, is they've got it in the back of their mind that part of the fun is if they take a new bot into a match and it doesn't perform too well, they can change it. They can make some additions, they can make some modifications, they can change all kinds of things, but if the design itself makes you feel like you can't change anything or you'll make the vehicle worse, then it's not a very good system. And one of the things that I've discovered, because I do tend to change my vehicles fairly regularly between matches, is that the Armor Core method lends itself very well to making additions and modifications, far more so than Triforce, just because the way Triforce goes together and the routing and things of that nature. So if I could describe the process of making these modifications, maybe that might not only make it seem a little bit easier than one might guess at first glance, but also help elucidate the process of making a vehicle from the beginning. So the first thing that I'm doing here is I have an idea in mind for what I want to happen. In this case, I want to move the guns forward 1 block. So then I'm not really worried about all the other blocks that are around unless they're in the way of where I want the new setup to go. And then I'm just thinking in terms of how am I going to connect this component to the rest of the vehicle. We had these little arms extending out from the shroud area over the thrusters. We need to adjust those, we need to change them so that they fit with the new configuration where the guns are going to be. Once we've positioned the gun where we want it, connected to the vehicle, then we think about what we're going to add around that connecting cluster of blocks in order to protect it as best we can within reason. I mean, obviously we could just build a brick around everything, but you're going to run out of blocks, you're going to run out of CPU, you're going to run out of a lot of things before you get things protected as much as we would all like them to be. So we kind of have to make that decision on the fly in terms of what's enough. The goal is never invulnerable, just last longer than the other guy, so to speak. So we've got this platform that the railgun was on, and you see, same as previously, we've connected it to that middle area. We've added an extra row of blocks in front of that connection just to give it some base armor. And now we're building a kind of front cover for the platform that the gun is on. And currently, it's not connected to the gun. Now, I misspoke in the last video. I said in the last video the way we had it set up was that the connection to the middle of the bot wasn't connected to the front. Like the gun was connected to the middle, nothing on the front was connected to the gun, and I was wrong because we did have it connected with prisms around the platform. The reason I said that is because I remember doing this and I just had the timeline all wrong in terms of when I did it. Now you can see we're adding tetras instead of prisms to this platform so that the front section that's protecting from having the gun, knocked off with one hit from an SMG is completely detached from the platform that the gun is actually resting on. So a little bit of extra protection. And again, there's no such thing as a perfect solution for the damage that we take. There's always going to be the shot that gets through our best planned layout. There's always going to be the guys who are just really, really good with the aim or just really, really lucky. But we don't want to make it any easier for them than it absolutely has to be. So that's why we invest a little bit of extra time into adding things around it. And basically, that's the whole thing and the whole reason why these vehicles end up looking far more complex than your regular sort of brick variety vehicle. It's not because I envision the vehicle to look the way it does from the very beginning, and then I'm just adding each and every block meticulously to make it look that way. It's because I start out with the most simple of visualizations in terms of where I want everything to be, do sort of like the skeleton idea, just get everything connected together, and then each and every component I go around and I armor it in the way that makes best use of what I think I've got at the time. So you can see here we're just duplicating across on the other side what we did to the previous gun. By the time we're done, by the time we've done all of these different components, you end up with a vehicle that looks extremely complex, even though that was never part of the plan. We never sat down and said, okay, this is where we're going to put everything to make it look that way. It's just that's the way it turned out, because that's the method, is to look at each individual thing and kind of do what we can with it, and then focus as well on all the connections and make sure that we don't have weak links and things of that nature. We'll see a little bit more of that later on. So these guns are in pretty good shape. We've got the platform that they're sitting on, a little bit of extra armor, the armor in the front, they're in a good location, we've got the legs moved forward. So once we get this guy done, what we need to be thinking about is expanding this platform somehow to get the fourth gun on in a way that makes sense, that fits with the whole idea of the vehicle peeking over. So it's got to be higher than the existing guns because it's in the back. And is going to work because, like I say, we don't want a gun that's just going to shoot into the chassis, shoot into the dirt, shoot into the gun in front of it every time, especially with rails, because I hate that feeling of the enemies coming after you and you just fired your last shot and now you're helpless for a certain period of time. So we want to get the most out of everything that we put on the vehicle. If we can't get the fourth gun to work, I would honestly rather pull it off and use the CPU for more armor. That's basically the way it works. So at this point, I'm just adding extra blocks. I'm kind of taking a look at things before we move on and add the fourth gun platform. Make sure that this area, while it's accessible, is kind of well taken care of. You see we've got those two diamond-shaped collections of prisms that are kind of adding just that little extra bit of armor. You know, a plasma bomb comes down and blops all over us. There's a little bit of extra armor to absorb the impact as opposed to just nothing. And now we start looking at this whole idea of adding a fourth platform for the railgun. And it's the same thing. We've got this structure. We've got to connect it to the structure somehow. Then we've got to armor the weapon. And then we've got to take a look at the whole picture. And we want to kind of fill in the gaps with as much armor as we can.
And also, as we've been mentioning throughout this video, we want to make sure that the gun is going to end up where we want the gun to be. So we're not just kind of extending something off into nowhere at this point and plopping a gun on it and saying good enough. In this case, we have a specific destination goal for this weapon. We want it to be in line with the rest of the weapons, just so that it's predictable where it is. We know in the back of our mind when we see the angles that the shots are coming from. We're zoomed in sniper mode. We'll be able to see, okay, the front gun just fired, the right gun, the left gun. Now we know the back gun is going to fire. Do we want to adjust our position? Do we think we're going to hit the back of the first rail gun? What do we do? The easiest way to do that is to have it in a position that makes sense. So kind of lined up with the rest of these things, taking into account the slope that this entire vehicle is on, so that we get a good firing angle when our legs are stuck to a wall vertically, or, you know, just barely tipping over, and the front end is hopefully ideally pretty close to flat, or even sloped down slightly if we can manage it. Now I put in that little knuckle there on the way up with the two prisms on either side as a way to make a change in direction with one block space instead of two. If we do the zigzag, If we want to move something back one block, we can't actually with the zigzag, so we have to be a little bit creative, and using that knuckle there again creates a really strong joint in a transition where the blocks wouldn't normally fit too well together, and then realized after the fact that we didn't need it at all, because when we finally got the gun into the position that we wanted, we didn't have to have it moved back, we had to have it moved up. So now we're adding another optional structural member, and this is exactly for one purpose, and that's to absorb damage coming in the direction of the fourth gun. That's it. It may or may not look interesting when it's done. I generally worry about that afterwards in terms of the aesthetic, what I can do with it. And in this case, again, it's putting something in place and taking a look at it and saying, if I'm a guy shooting at this, where are my shots going to go? And it's a little bit too far forward, I felt, especially because we've got that little V sort of dip in there so that we can move it backwards. And it's just kind of, there's too big of a gap between the front sort of area that I'm looking at now and the actual member that's holding the gun. So we're kind of drop it a little bit and then raise it up in front again. And just like that, we've got something, it's in tighter. So there's less chance of shots kind of sneaking by and hitting the structural member holding the gun as opposed to the armor section. Looks a little bit better, I think. Not necessarily expensive, easier to place than electroplates on a build like this. That's one thing that I've noticed with my builds. Now, one of the reasons that you don't see a lot of electroplates on my builds is because I use all my CPU on chassis blocks. But also because the way things work out, I feel like I'm modifying the vehicle to make room for the electroplates, and it doesn't always kind of strike me as being the best way to go, especially when I see how easily I pop electroplates off of other vehicles. I'm kind of If I could make them fit and I had the CPU, I wouldn't hesitate, but it's usually a case of putting the blocks in first and then realizing after the fact that we barely got everything else on that we wanted, and the electroplates just wouldn't fit. So we've got the gun in place, we've got the structural member holding it, we've got the armor section in front. Now I want to kind of take a look at things in terms of the armor, and where is, the final look, where is damage coming from and where is it going to go. We want to change the prism that the gun is sitting on so that damage from the front can't transfer directly to it. And then we worry about putting on the last little extra armor bits, and before you know it, it's mostly there. All we can really do now is probably add a bunch of Tetris, if memory serves, because that's very, very common for me. It's just an easy way to basically take a single prism, add a Tetra to either side. You've tripled the armor value potentially of that particular area just by adding it instead of open air. Helps with the appearance. It's one of those things I can never think of a reason not to do it, except for I'm out of CPU or I'm out of blocks. Realistically, at this point, we're pretty much home free in terms of getting the gun into the right position that we want. And now, because we don't have to think in terms of where's our gun and where's the rest of the vehicle, we start thinking pretty much at the block level. And I can say we're going to be spending a little bit of time here adding a bunch of extra blocks, all prisms, all Tetras, specifically for the purpose of absorbing damage. And all we're thinking when we're placing each of these blocks is, if something hits this block, some form of damage hits this block, where is that damage going to transfer to? Is it going to be better, worse, or the same as it would be if we didn't place this block? Worse, obviously, means we don't want to place that block there. Ideally better, but even if it's the same, just by adding that extra block, like I keep kind of harping on, we're increasing the armor value of the vehicle, because you never know where the hits are going to come from. And there's so many times where you kind of wonder, if I just had a few extra blocks there, would that have kind of made the difference, or would I still have been sent back to the garage so quickly? Easiest way to do that is to mess around and experiment with how far you can get adding extra armor to your vehicle. As long as you've got the CPU and the money to buy the blocks, you might surprise yourself with how much longer you'll survive just by making your vehicle a little bit bigger. Now in this case,
I'm kind of looking at just the nature of this whole structure. It's kind of long, extending from the chassis, the shroud, over the thrusters, up to the railgun. It's one of those things that we've done a good job of adding extra blocks to it. We've done a good job of protecting it from the front, but it's still a little bit on the vulnerable side, and we might be able to correct that by kind of joining the two segments. So now we've got those two structural segments that are basically joined in two places by all the prisms that we've placed in sort of the skirt formation around it. I would say this is a fairly strong part of the vehicle. And still, when you look at that little platform that the railgun is sitting on, that's a vulnerability, and it's unavoidable, unfortunately, unless we wanted to build just a regular brick and put all the railguns on top. Whenever we start working on different levels, it's really, really difficult to protect everything as much as we would like. And in this case, because of the nature of the vehicle and what we're trying to accomplish, I'm willing to accept that vulnerability and not having this huge platform for that one gun to sit on. And we'll see if it's becoming a problem. If we're regularly losing that gun before we've really had a chance to use it, then we'd probably be better off taking it off and using that CPU somewhere else, either relocating the gun, adding more blocks, adding electroplates, whatever. That's one thing you won't see a lot of on my vehicles, unfortunately, is electroplates, because I build so large, I don't have the CPU to add a bunch of electroplates. It's kind of the thing. If you want to build a small vehicle, that's fine, but you need to cover it in electroplates. Otherwise, it's just basically a plasma. It's a free kill for a plasma bomber, is one way of putting it. If you want to build big, you have to build well. Otherwise, the lack of electroplates, because you don't have the CPU to put them on, will also be an issue. It's kind of the catch-22. Both work, but both have to be done right. Now in this case, we've got some radar components left to put on, but other than that, it's just these thrusters that I want to get on, and then we're going to get into the practice map and test to see how things are working out. We've got one thruster facing upward, and that's to help balance sort of the thrust when we're jumping, so that the vehicle doesn't necessarily misbehave and start going all wonky, as we learned doing like forward flips and stuff like that. Once the vehicle is done, this is another lesson that I learned from the Spider, is we're going to be adding a lot of extra blocks around the thrusters, around the driver's seat, around the radar components, and that changes the weight distribution on the vehicle. So whatever we set up now isn't necessarily going to work when the vehicle is done, no matter what it does when we first test it. So we just keep that in mind, and we do the best we can with what we've got. This thruster serves two purposes. One, it allows us to correct in flight. If we're tilting forward, we can fire the thruster and kind of tilt back a bit. And also, if we end up on our back, it's the thing that will allow us to right ourselves and get back up on our legs. So all that's left is a little bit of mucking around in the practice map, and I'll just let you watch this. I don't need to tell you exactly what's going on. You'll be able to see when the thrusters are firing and how that impacts the performance of the vehicle. The next episode, we'll start adding more of the cladding protection. We'll have the rest of the radar bits on. We'll see how the vehicle starts to take shape. Might even get into our first real match. Maybe. We'll see how it goes. If you want to be notified about that vehicle, part 3, the final build episode, you can always subscribe to my channel. That's one way. You can also follow me on the social media. Links for that are in the information section below the video. Please do leave your comments and feedback. I plan on building more vehicles, so we'll be doing more build series. Let me know what you thought of this one. As always, thanks for watching, guys, and take care.